ugly, rip-roaring feud that gives anything you've ever seen on reality TV a run for its money, that is still ongoing between Elon Musk and Donald Trump, is that proverbial crash scene that no one can look away from. Today, Donald Trump referred to Musk as, quote, the man who lost his mind in an interview with ABC's Jon Karl, adding that he's not talking to him. He's not going to call him first. He's, quote, not interested in talking to Elon Musk. And to keep the bad breakup parallel going, where you throw out all the stuff you ever got from your ex and all the T-shirts you ever borrowed from them, there's reporting now that Trump's considering giving away the Tesla he bought at a highly inappropriate event on the White House lawn 2 months ago that experts at the time described as a blatant violation of ethics rules, corruption playing out in public, they said. Senator Chris Murphy called it that at the time. But beyond the schoolyard taunts and the very public, very nasty feuding between the two men, the spectacle, I likened it yesterday to two tarantulas in a bowl. The reason we care and the reason we're covering it for a second day is, one, Trump doesn't want us to, and two, there are real stakes for the American people and how this ends. The stakes speak to the enormous power Elon Musk inappropriately accumulated / purchased. Take, for example, Musk's threat to decommission SpaceX's Dragon spacecraft, which he later retracted after somebody on his platform asked him to on X. Politico reports this, quote, Musk's threat would deprive the U.S. of its only assured way of supplying the International Space Station and bringing on and off astronauts. If executed, NASA would instead have to rely on Russia to bring supplies and astronauts to the station. Imagine that, Elon Musk or Russia. Not clear what Trump would choose, right? At least not to me. That threat was in response to Trump, who attacked Musk by saying, I'm going to end all your federal contracts for all of Musk's companies. Something that, again, ethically and normally might be the right thing to do, but because he's so embedded, would cause utter chaos for the U.S. military if it's done in the spirit and context and the moment of this fight. Washington Post reports this, quote, over the years, SpaceX has become a vital contractor, launching sensitive national security payloads such as satellites that provide missile warning, battlefield communication, and guide munitions to precise targets. NPR reports this, quote, SpaceX's Starlink satellite network is a player in a multi-billion-dollar federal effort to expand internet access to underserved parts of the country. Trump was fine with all that commingling of his donor and the United States federal government and Musk's businesses, all those contracts on which NASA, the Pentagon, millions of actual human beings depend on, until Musk went there, attacked his big, not so beautiful bill, and invoked his presence in the Epstein files, something for which there is no publicly known evidence. The Bulwark puts it like this, quote, the disquieting reality continues to hang in the air. Major parts of our government rely on a return to goodwill between two of the most arrogant and emotionally unbalanced men alive. In what world is that not a massive national security risk? Joining our conversation is Tyler Pager. He's a White House correspondent for the New York Times. He's co-author of the soon-to-be-released book, 2024. Matt Dowd is still here as well. Tyler, where are we? And, you know, like sands through the hourglass. You're too young to even know what that is, Days of Our Lives soap opera. But where are we in this very public fight between Elon Musk and Donald Trump?
Yeah, I think we're just waiting to see what the next step might be. We saw Elon Musk, as you mentioned, Nicole, position himself as willing to potentially have a détente with Trump, responding to people on X last night who were encouraging him to lay down the weapons and sort of return to some semblance of a relationship. But the president has seemingly shown no interest in that outreach. White House officials telling me that the president had no plans to call Elon Musk, despite some reporting that may happen. Trump doing a round of brief interviews with reporters this morning, saying he's not all that concerned about Elon Musk and he's focused on the economy and the bill that Musk has spent the last several days assailing on social media. But Nicole, I think your point and your intro here is really important. It's easy to get caught up in the war of words and the personal insults and taunts, but what lies at the heart of this relationship is of two of the most powerful men in the world is an extreme reliance on the federal government on some of Elon Musk's companies. And so that threat from President Trump yesterday about potentially cutting those contracts and subsidies and other relationships between the government and Musk companies represents not only an existential threat potentially to Musk companies, but also to the operations of some of the critical functions of the U.S. government. So obviously this alliance was forged in sort of unpredictable ways over the campaign trail as Musk poured his own money into helping Trump get elected. And then we saw them rummage through the federal government through the DOGE effort. But beyond that, the relationship between the government and the private companies is really quite critical for both parties. And so I think that there is some interest, at least from allies of both men, of lowering the temperature. But as we saw yesterday, it's quite unpredictable what could come next. And so we're just watching both of their social media platforms that they own, X for Musk and Truth Social for Trump, to see what direction this might head in next.
Tyler, I don't want to let the seriousness of the charge that Musk makes get lost in the flurry of barbs. This is what Elon Musk said about almost exactly 24 hours ago. Quote, "Time to drop the really big bomb. Real Donald Trump is in the Epstein files. That is the real reason they have not been made public. Have a nice day." Is there any line of open reporting that supports that? Where is that? What is that? Where does that come from?
Yeah, there is a lot of nuggets and details about speculation about Donald Trump's potential naming in those files. Part of it comes from the fact that Trump did have a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. White House officials countered that assertion by Elon Musk very aggressively last night, saying there's no evidence of that, and also noting that Trump, severed his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. But that accusation from Musk is essentially the equivalent of Musk going nuclear on Trump, really leveling a severe accusation against the president that the president and his allies were very frustrated and disturbed by. So it is, as you said, a serious accusation. There is no known evidence of Trump being noted in those files or named in those files. But you're right, Nicole, it's important to note that Musk did level not just that one post that you showed, but a series of posts linking Trump to Epstein and those documents. And I think just to take a step back, one thing we should note is obviously the trove of documents about Jeffrey Epstein has been a cause célèbre for the MAGA base and Republicans who have pushed Trump to fully release all of those documents. So part of that dig there from Musk was sort of an appeal to that MAGA base that has been salivating over the potential that they would get full purview into those documents.